for B2B, you have, because of the development cycle and the number of customers, by the time they integrate the technologies, by the time they adopt the technologies, you have a pretty good sense, maybe several weeks, several months out in some cases. As a security professional, I cringe how many browser extensions are being added. What I cringe at even more is when my users at my office are adding browser extensions, not knowing what they're adding. Because they add a functionality, say, oh, why not? I trust that particular publisher. They have no idea who's the actual publisher. I've been fortunate enough to see evolution of technologies. Every time new technology comes out, it takes time for people to understand it. It takes time for people to find intelligent, positive use of it. Also, the same amount of time for hackers to figure out what they want to do with that. Same capabilities and information. Security professionals have always been on the lagging side. I don't think we have a choice of being lagging this time, because the same technologies that allows business to accelerate also allows attackers to take advantage of it. And it's just going to make the environment much more rapid in evolution.
Hi, Stan. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you very much. Absolutely pleased to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited for this conversation. And, it's always a pleasure to meet someone that someone and that person knows someone. And it's like the whole chain.
The cybersecurity industry is just really small. So this is awesome.
Yeah, indeed. So I just want to share your background with our listeners, whoever's going to be listening, who you are, what you do, what we are doing in the space. So Stan is actually CISO at EarnIn. Did I pronounce it correctly?
That is correct. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you actually been in this industry for 25 years, so for quite some time. Financial services, cybersecurity, telecommunications, education sector. Is there any sector that I didn't mention? I think there's so many sectors you were part of.
I've also been in pharmaceutical, professional services. So my background is meandering quite a bit in my early careers, trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have such a, broader perspective, whatever industry they can throw you into, you can always navigate your way. And so you are focused on safeguarding trust with EarnIn while balancing security with innovation and rapidly changing financial equity space. So super exciting. So maybe share a little bit, how did you enter this space and how you ended up at your current role at EarnIn?
Well, that's a very long couple of decades of history. I'll try to keep it short. So I actually hold a degree in biochemistry. So I graduated from UCLA towards the mid-90s. I'm not going to think myself too much. I find myself in an industry where there was very little in the space of genetic research. That was more about just the politics at the time and the funding for the national research, especially around genetic research. Aside from the history, I found myself in situations where I either could make decisions on living comfortably or continuing to pursue what I was doing at the time. So I decided to actually, at the right timing, to enter the tech sector. So my first job in the tech sector was actually working at the IT help desk.
Okay.
One thing led to another. I was given a lot of opportunities, a lot of coaching, a lot of mentoring. Found myself in systems architecture, systems design early on. So I had my own company for a little bit in professional services. Dabbled a little bit in telecommunications industries for a bit, also in pharmaceutical space, all doing technologies back then. And really kind of came into selling in my career doing security at this electronic design automation company, Synopsys back then. Synopsys has since transformed into a software security company and then went back to a simulation company.
Yeah.
So a little bit of history with that. And since then it's been in the fintech with the Intuit, Palo Alto Networks, and then now PayPal, and then now that EarnIn.
Yeah, that is very fascinating industry and history. How did you decide sort of to try out so many industries? Because I think a lot of people would have a fear of switching from one industry to another. How did you navigate that risk, and what sort of encouraged you to move across so many industries?
I was fortunate enough to be given a lot of opportunities to just learn, because my early career, that was not traditionally trained in software engineering, infrastructure designs. Back then, you couldn't go to school in MIS, right? I had some friends that graduated from college. They enrolled in the first MIS program, I believe at Carnegie Mellon. Prior to that, it's not something you do.
Yeah.
There's a computer science program, there's computer engineering programs. But MIS, what we call MIS now, it was not a thing. Cybersecurity was not really a thing.
Yeah.
And just by pure curiosity, ended up doing a lot of independent studies, a lot of research, technology implementation. My managers at the time were very, very open-minded about me trying different things, allowing me to fail a lot of times. So what led me to finally decide that cybersecurity is the one thing I want to do is actually exactly what happened there. Is because the industry was expanding so quickly during the early .coms. A lot of people were specializing. Oh, I'm a systems guy. I'm a network engineer. I'm whatever it was happening at the time.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to be able to do something that I could touch different part of the technologies. And the one area that allows me to do that was actually in security. So it allowed me to manage directory systems, do software designs, do infrastructure designs, do systems design. That's actually how I started in cybersecurity, because I didn't want to have to decide on what is the one technology that I want to learn and specialize.
That is super interesting. It's, some people would think it's such a difficult space to enter, but at the same time, not being a specialist, but sort of journalist, definitely helps.
At least early days, because I had a chance to actually grow up a lot with the cybersecurity space. I think the attacks back then were much simpler. They're not as sophisticated. So a lot of folks are entering the field right now. You have to be specialized. You have to be really in depth on the type of attacks that's happening at an application level, an infrastructure level, of course, a social engineering level. So there's different aspects of it that's very, very different than when I first entered the field.
Yeah. What kind of attacks do you see nowadays that weren't as prevalent previously, and now you think, okay, this is something people should pay more attention to?
Sophistication of attack is very different. We see now multi-layer attacks. So usually there's a particular vector into a particular part of an environment. You see a lot of pivot and a lot of movement, and it continues to progress with privilege escalations. That's the type of patterns that we're seeing. In the early days, there's a lot less segmentations, a lot less technologies. Once you find an entryway in, either be phishing or through some other means, is usually 1 or 2 steps away. These days, I think the types of attacks that people have to layer on is much more sophisticated. So you can't get away with just one layer of control. You have to have multiple layers of control. And the hope is that you either be able to defend and protect your environment. If not, you slow down an attacker just enough so that you can identify those movements inside your network before they do more damages.
Yeah. I think it's so essential to sort of catch on attack before it can infect your whole system. And during RSA and overall, one of the topics that I hear a lot is, hey, how do we stop the attack just when it started, before the infection got spread out? And often the entry point becomes the browser. And when it comes to financial services, do you see a lot of attacks orchestrated via this attack surface? And what are the best ways that you would recommend security professionals to protect against this?
Yeah, web applications is still one of the most prevalent technology out there, right? It's very common. It's on the phones and on your tablet device, of course, on your desktops and laptops. It's still a very, very common vector because it's ubiquitous. That's the biggest thing. There's all sorts of different types of attacks, either from a malicious website standpoint or attacks against web applications. As a secure professionals, you have to be able to defend against both because you have your egress traffic from your corporate environment, from your enterprise that goes out. But at the same time, if you're like us, you have a web presence and you have to protect our customers from anything that's happening on our website that we're responsible for as well.
How do you, I'm sure it's slightly different approach when it comes to protecting yourself and then your customers. How do you sort of break down your practices and make sure you're efficient on both fronts?
It's really, really diversity of techniques, right? So when you're talking about building a web application and how you defend a web applications, it starts with, of course, the software engineers, your infrastructure, how you're designing your applications internally. What does that architecture look like? Is it a sound architecture? Is it a resilient architecture? Do you have layers of security controls for the different types of services you might be using to build up your application? Because some applications are quite complex, right? In other cases, it might be a very simple web application, so not all architecture is going to look the same to you. So it's layering on those applications and infrastructure controls, making sure that the software engineers are doing the proper things in terms of the systems designs, threat model against that, making sure that you have mitigating controls and defensive controls and protective controls through every single part of the software, the infrastructure, the product and the services itself. And then you also, of course, have to protect the boundaries, making sure that there's a number of things that's going on at the service edge and then the internet edge, network edge that you have. So it's a lot of layering of those technologies. That's what constitutes almost the entire defensive capability for a web application.
Okay. This is on the web application side, but when it comes to, let's say, beyond web application, when it comes to interaction of your users, right? I'm sure a lot of people out there are not necessarily the most tech savvy, and even the most tech savvy people get targeted quite frequently. What are some practices that you'd like to put in place to protect those individuals?
I like to think about that problem from a zero trust standpoint. I know it's a very common below term. It's been around for a long time now. The way to really think about it is from an end-to-end perspective. You have to look at the individual all the way through, of course, the device, the browser, the network that those devices on, the network you're traversing, and ultimately who you believe is the actual destinations you're going to. And whether or not you trust the applications and what they're doing with your data, your information, or if they're transacting something on your behalf, what they're doing there, and how they're protecting the data there. So you have to look at that spectrum of capabilities. And hope nothing in the middle, it's not what it seems, right? Or something's been compromised in that process. And that's quite a bit of challenge. A lot of time from a corporate environment standpoint, you also have to worry about all the little pieces, so the third-party pieces, the additional providers that you may or may not trust. Just because your provider, your service provider is trusting them doesn't mean you need to trust them. So you have to worry about that type of attack as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to be worried about, and just to add another layer of complexity, when it comes to corporate versus personal life, right? How do you advise whether security professionals within your organization or whoever knocks on your door for some advice? To sort of, how do you protect your employees without sort of affecting the personal life, Because what happens frequently is someone messages you on LinkedIn saying, hey, here's a great job ad, apply, click on that link, enter corporate credentials, and your whole organization can get compromised. Right.
Browser-based attacks are becoming more common. Obviously, a lot of attacks still focus on the endpoint and the end users itself. Assuming that you do all the right things, you have the right technology to control it, you still have to make sure that the browser is the rendering tool, if you will, right? That's the last client device that you're really looking at, client application you're looking at. So you have to make sure that's a secure device as well. So more common techniques these days, you're seeing secure browsers. Secure browser serves a couple purposes. Number one, as in the enterprise, what you want to make sure is that the data that you're hosting, the data that you're allowing your customers or your users to access is going to places where it's going. A lot of times, there's a lot of sensitive data they might be able to view on the browser. There's different techniques for defending it against it. Secure browsers allow you to extend those controls all the way down to the endpoint. but allow you to maximize the performance latencies that you would expect from an endpoint device. But anything that you're rendering inside a secure browser stays safe. And there's a lot of secure browser techniques out there right now that allows you to actually have relatively strong defensive controls around it. So even if something goes wrong on the backend side, the secure browser should be protecting the users from those types of attack as well.
Do you think is there enough awareness in the space regarding browser-based threats, or is there still lack of understanding? Because I think a lot of times people believe that SASE, SSE solutions are able to cover that part, but they work on a network traffic, so it's not necessarily the case. Do you think, is there enough awareness?
That's a good question. I think it's a evolving threat.
Yeah.
Browser-based attacks been around for a long time. There's always new techniques. There's new browser architecture. So, of course, the latest version of it is everything's the derivative of WebKit.
Yeah.
And we're still finding vulnerabilities in WebKit after this many years. Unfortunately, all the browser vendors out there, so the names of the big three, for example, they still struggle with it. I don't think there's ever an extended period of time. When I say extended, I'm talking about months at a time where there aren't vulnerabilities in browsers. It's always new. So as a practitioner, you have to find the layers of techniques. Just because you have a proxy connection, the proxy protection, or SASE services, doesn't mean you have guarantee that you're protecting an endpoint device. Unfortunately, it's something that you have to look at continuously. So it goes back to that zero trust model, right? So you have to look at everything between the user and where your data resides. Every single technology you use in the middle is susceptible to some sort of attack eventually.
That's a very good point. And I'm also curious what school of thought you come from when it comes to just in general, the number of security solutions, right? When it comes to new technologies, new spaces, a lot of security leaders think, hey, I just want to have this one thing that would solve things that these three companies are doing for me. So I just want to replace. Are you more of a let's replace three solutions with one kind of person, or you're the one that likes to add? Because I'm hearing very different opinions when it comes to that.
Over my career, I've had a chance to work with where I'm at, a much smaller startup, and also very large enterprises, also on the side of secure product companies. So my point of view have evolved over time. Fundamentally, what I believe in is that I don't think there's a single philosophy that maps universally. So depending on the industry, depending on the company you're at, you might have different strategies. So in large enterprises, you might have the ability to have a very large scale organization that allows you to adopt multiple technologies that solves for very, very specific edge cases, because you're under that type of attack, you're under that type of threat. So you have to understand what the risks are, but the capabilities you need to protect against that type of organization. So in those cases, you may need a lot of niche solutions. That means you have a lot more vendors out there. In smaller companies, you don't have the same number of resources. In those cases, you're buying into the platform story because now you have multiple capabilities you can manage with less staff. In other companies I've been at, it's very engineering focused. So they tend to build a lot of solutions, or they bring in a lot of solutions that they could adapt very quickly and integrate very quickly. So it's all different techniques, depends on the resourcing, depending on the types of risks that you have in the company. And ultimately, what's your threat profile and what kind of technologies best defend against those type of threats you're trying to protect against.
And when it comes to financial services, right? I'm sure this is something that you've been part of already for quite a number of years. What are some unique challenges that you think a lot of people overlook when it comes to this industry, and that you're like, you guys didn't look enough into this problem and should really focus on this a little more?
So I've been in fintechs, direct-to-consumer fintechs for several times in my career. I think what draws me back into that particular industry quite a bit is because of the scale of the business and the dynamic nature of the business. A lot of it is because But the industry, the world we live in right now, a lot of it is driven by a web application, a mobile application.
Yeah.
It's just as easy for me to switch from one solution to another solution. So what it means is that we have to continuously stay up to date as a service provider, as a fintech technologist. What am I giving to my customers? What is my strategic advantage? What are the things that makes us unique?
Yeah.
And you have to do that really fast because you're servicing millions of users at a time. In some cases, right? Depends on the service you're in.
Yeah.
And customers are finicky. They move very quickly and they have choice. And we want them to have choice, which means that products have to be dynamic. Security has to stay up to pace with the business. So security doesn't get to be the luxury of saying, hey, we're going to slow things down. We have to move at the same pace as the business. And whatever direction the technology changes from the business, we have to adapt. So what we have to do is actually anticipate what the company is doing, how the product is shifting, and what technologies our product's going to be powered by. That's what we're looking for. Right? So we're always trying to predict what's going to happen next. And that part is hard.
Yeah, that is very hard. And I'm sure have to be constantly at, DEF CONs just to hear how attackers operate today and what they're doing, new things. And especially on the consumer side, right? I'm sure it's very different when you try to protect B2C space versus B2B space. Is it mostly related to speed, or there are some additional challenges that, makes these two categories so different?
So one of my former employers, probably one of the largest enterprise business out there right now. And for them, they have 10,000 customers. I think they're now probably more than that. Compared to one of my other employers who's in fintech, one of the largest fintechs in the world, they're servicing 800 million users worldwide. 1 out of 10 people is using their technology. It's easy to, I shouldn't say easy, it's more finite to try to figure out what your 10,000 customer base are. That's a B2B business.
Yeah.
And the purchase cycles are longer. So typically a purchase cycle is about 1 year.
Yeah.
If it's a new customer, 1 to 2 years, depends on the relationship, is very different. Versus your purchasing cycle with a consumer is a matter of hours, maybe even minutes sometimes. So, and you're not solving for just 10,000. You're trying to figure out what, in the case of this other former employer of mine, 800 million people want across multiple countries, right, is very, very different. So for B2C, you have to move really fast. You have to experiment. You have to test different things to see how your customers react. Because when you push out a release, you find out whether or not they like it or don't like it very, very quickly. Versus in B2B, you have, because of the development cycle and the number of customers, by the time they integrate the technologies, by the time they adopt the technologies, you have a pretty good sense, maybe several weeks, several months out in some cases, right? So a lot of times it's the early adoption with those B2B customers. That's how you test and find out. Versus in B2C, you deploy out, you measure, you make these minor changes to see how they react and respond to it. So the way that you manage those two are very different. And part of it is, so to answer your question, I'm going all the way around it.
No.
In the B2B world, a lot of times is engaging those customers because they have very specific sales cycle, they have specific length of time. So there are things like a SOC 2 Type 2 report. If you're a service provider, there's ISO standards, there's other certifications that allows you to say, hey, this is how I benchmark. In the case of a B2C, you don't have that because they decide whether or not they're going to use your product within seconds and minutes or days, right? In those cases, a lot of it is based on brand. So it's based on trust. You have to be able to establish that, have that brand, have that presence with your customer base for them to know that, hey, if you're going to ask me for my personal information, what are you going to do with it? So a lot of it is, do they know who you are? Do they trust you? Do they have confidence that you will protect and use their data in the right way? So a lot of that is managed in a different way than, hey, I'm going to go through an audit, I'm going to show you my audit report.
I'm sure that the sales cycles really influence the way you conduct cybersecurity, right? Because as you mentioned, in B2C, it might take them seconds to switch to somebody else, while B2B, it's more of a longer process. But then once you kind of signed up, then you might stay there at least for a year. But is there, I'm also assuming that although B2C is much faster, I would assume that B2B is a little bit fine-grained. You have to be very, very specific when it comes to whatever you're pushing out there. Is it the case or not necessarily?
A lot depends on relationship in the product and the service you're providing. A lot of time the customers, an enterprise customer, they may have specific requirements and features. For example, integration into the directory services for enterprise single sign-on, how they potentially be using group mapping for authorization purposes, just kind of varies a little bit. In those cases, those are very specific security features that oftentimes the security team work with product managers, work with engineers. Hey, this is how we think about it. This is how we design. This is how we typically manage it, which is a representation of what our customers are doing. And usually you don't have that level of control as a consumer because a lot of consumers focus on usability, flexibility.
Yes.
So the type of features, you want the right set of features for the services you're providing. For example, you're a payment provider. You want that payment process to be easy. You don't want to walk up to a counter when you're going grocery shopping. You don't want to walk up to the checker to say, hey, this is going to take me about 30 seconds. You want that transaction to be very fast.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a different experience than, hey, I'm building a payments product for an enterprise, because in those cases, you have all of your accounting controls you have to take into place. So you have your workflow, you have your approval process. In those types of designs, it's very different between what a consumer looks like for payment versus what a payment system looks like for an enterprise.
And when it comes to being a cybersecurity leader in one space versus the other, are there specific qualities that you think are required for, let's say, being a CISO at B2C company versus B2B company?
I think the commonality for a CISO that operates in both space, you have to be really passionate about the business you're in, whether you're B2B or B2C. If you're passionate about it, it would make you learn about what matters, who your customers are, what they're looking for. So in both cases, if you have that quality, I think that's universal. The pace of the business is very different. How you work with the business is very different. In traditional software delivery to an enterprise, there's a longer development cycle. There's an expectation that the quality, including security, is part of it. So what you don't want to do is release a piece of software on a monthly cadence and have patching that goes out immediately, right? That's unacceptable. So that's a very different type of engagement that you would have with engineers, with the customers, with the product managers, versus in the B2C space, because the software updates happen so quickly, it happens in the background. You don't want vulnerabilities in it either, but also at the same time, you're not going to have release notes that goes into a piece of mobile software. You do have release notes, but very, very few people actually look at what's the delta in the release notes. Most of the time, the app's just updates on your phone. You don't really think about it. But the information is actually there. So a responsible mobile application developer would actually have, hey, what has changed? What's in this particular release? What's different? Is there any security fixes in it? In those cases, if you look, it's actually available, but most people don't even realize it's there.
Yeah, I know that we're talking about mobile applications, but I think we have to touch upon the topic of extensions, right?
That's a touchy subject.
It is. Why is it this touchy subject?
I feel like our industry, we learn this lesson over and over again. So I still remember back when Internet Explorer was the dominant browser, and ActiveX was the plugin form factor. And there were just all sorts of issues with ActiveX. So after a long time, and Netscape was also a part of it. And Netscape had their own versions of plugins as well back then. And the industry pushed back and say, hey, these plugins are full of security issues. Because it's really hard to, again, browser security is very difficult. So in that particular space, what happens is that becomes a vector of getting the browser infected with something. And that's when you have the attacker in the browser issue. If there's nothing else you could do to really protect against those type of scenarios, it's really, really difficult. We pushed away and say, hey, we're not going to do plugins anymore because it's full of vulnerabilities. And what happens in the last few years, we seem to be reintroducing plugins again. I feel like the number of security solutions I've seen that have browser extensions, it's increasing. I feel like we're getting back to where we were before, but hopefully I think we're doing it a little bit better than last time.
So what do you think, what is your attitude towards extensions, right? Are you pro extensions? Are you against extensions? Because we cannot deny how many productivity advantages. I mean, personally, I'm not shy of it. I use Grammarly all the time. I mean, English is not my first language, so every email that I write, I always miss an article or something. I'm sure it's the case for some people out there. But are you pro extensions when it comes to deploying in enterprises?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So at a personal level, I use browser extensions. So I think there's a lot of really great browser extensions that adds capabilities for just end users. As a security professional, I cringe how many browser extensions are being added. What I cringe at even more is when my users at my office are adding browser extensions, not knowing what they're adding. Because they add a functionality, say, oh, why not? I trust that particular publisher. They have no idea who's the actual publisher. I think a tell these days is now we're seeing security companies are adding plugins protections on the browsers. So it's an indication that, hey, maybe the plugin world is getting to be very big again if we have to worry about that being insecure again.
I think, thankfully, the whole browser security space is evolving where there are now ways to actually have control over extensions. But, attackers keep on innovating, and you always have to stay on the top of things when it comes to extensions, even as we touch upon the latest Cyber attack that happened last December, right? Where the extension was actually publicly listed, right? That was the whole situation. And then, enterprise extensions don't have to be publicly listed for them to be deployed. So I think there's a lot of conversations out there, but as you speak to fellow CISOs in the space, are there ways that you see them actually putting control in place?
So there are a few types of browsers out there. They're designed for enterprises. So they restrict what kind of plugins could be deployed. In some cases, again, we go back to the secure browser model. In those cases, is very explicitly designed so that the browser itself has policies built into it, much more so than your usual consumer-based browsers. And it gives us, as security practitioners, controls on what could be done, what could be installed, what could be deployed, what could be added on. In those cases, it gives us a lot more control if those are areas that you have to worry about. A lot of it depends on, hey, what's your threat model, right? Is that something that you have to worry about? I do think it's becoming more prevalent. The Cyberhaven is a good example of what happens when supply chains get compromised, how it affects security companies and also consumers as a result of it, right? Or customers of Cyberhaven in this particular case. It is unfortunate when that happens. It is a very complex model in terms of what you have to be able to do to protect everything from, of course, development pipeline to publishing it and having your customers deployed on wide scale to it. It's becoming also a prevalent attack too, right? With what you could do with supply chain attacks.
Yeah. And I think many people don't even realize how easy it's actually even to purchase an extension that is publicly listed. A friend of mine was telling, she's a security researcher, but you can literally message extension publishers, offer them some money, and they will be more than willing to give up their database of users. And it's just crazy to think that, all of this is so publicly available.
Monetization is a very big motivator for a lot of things to go wrong. So you do have to consider who are the publishers you trust, what publishers you want in your environment, or do you trust enough for their plugins and their software in your environment? Browsers is just like another app store these days. In some cases, they are exactly that. They're an app store.
Yeah. And, financial institutions have so many, how to say, evolving threats that try to target them. And besides all the external threats, there are also a lot of internal threats. For example, when it comes to data leakage, right? Do you see any more like innovative ways that people try to evade different techniques, or what advice would you give to people when it comes to data leakage, when it comes to financial services?
The general principles around zero trust still very much applies, meaning reduce the amount of access you need to provide your business users. In some cases, it means providing dynamic access. If you have the ability to provision access just in time, which is a very difficult thing to do.
That is very difficult.
And the other thing you need to do is making sure that wherever you have your sensitive data, it stays where you think it is. Given this current world of browser-based technologies, understandable why a lot of things are on web-based clients, because it's faster development, faster delivery. In those cases, you have to make sure that what data you send down the browser, you know where it's going. What the browser is doing with that data, you have to know what the browser is doing with that data. So there's a very complex problem. Again, in the zero trust model, what you want to do is everything in between. You want to make sure that person who you think it is, the data stays where it is, and only the people that need access to it has access in the most limited ways, if possible, without impacting business. I can see my CEO telling me already, cringing as we're watching this, that you can't always reduce it down to the point where it becomes high friction for the business. So there's different techniques of doing it. I think that's for a different time. And then you have to figure out where that data is being sent to. If it's being sent to your browser, if it's being sent to your device, you have to know what is being done with it. Is it being stored locally? Is it being reflected off of some other channels? Those are things that are very, very difficult to defend against.
Yeah. And as your CEO was saying about the high friction, I think when it comes to security controls, you have to be so careful into how do you make this whole user experience safe and at the same time not super high friction. Because at the end of the day, let's say if you block all tools, let's say block all generative AI websites where you can't use ChatGPT, you can't use Perplexity, people are just gonna go and use their own version, They're gonna do it inevitably. So if we pick the example of generative AI, do you think enterprises should block this kind of things, or still use them?
You don't ask me very easy questions.
I'll stop grilling you soon. I promise.
This is RAS week. Have a lot of conversations. I think the industry is very split. I think from a security world, we understand the capabilities around generative AI and what it brings to a lot of things that we do on a day-to-day basis, both personal as well as professional. Almost regardless of what your role is, I think generative AI has a future and has a future impact in a positive way that I could think of right now. So we should be adopting these technologies. At the same time, I think there's a lot of dynamic evolution very, very quickly. For example, I think DeepSeek is a fine example of how fast things are moving.
Yeah.
And things that happen after DeepSeek is equally fast as well, right? Yeah. It's all happened in the last few months only. So as security practitioners, you could be afraid of it, which means that you can block everything.
Yeah.
But you also hamper your individual growth, your personal growth, as well as your business.
Yeah.
Is that the right thing to do? Well, in a very highly regulated environment where you don't need that type of acceleration, maybe not. The rest of us who are living in a more dynamic world, and you're in constant competition with everyone else, I don't know that you could use that playbook.
It's a very wise answer. Yeah. I think it makes it an easy answer if you could just block everything. But then it's not something that is sustainable.
I've been fortunate enough to see evolution of technologies. Every time new technology comes out, it takes time for people to understand it. It takes time for people to find intelligent, positive use of it. Also, the same amount of time for hackers to figure out what they want to do with that same capabilities and information. Security professionals have always been on the lagging side.
Yeah.
I don't think we have a choice of being lagging this time, because the same technologies that allows business to accelerate also allows attackers to take advantage of it. And it's just going to make the environment much more rapid in evolution. So that would encourage a lot of security professionals to go learn about it, figure out what they want to do with it, what they need to do with it, and how they're going to use it to protect their environment as opposed to the other way around. Blocking and pretending that it's not coming is not going to help them.
You just have to make sure you're a little bit ahead than the attacker side and use the technology to your advantage.
It's evolving very quickly. So there are some threats that we should consider. How we all want to manage those threats, it just depends on the use case.
What kind of technologies are you most excited about?
Technologies I'm most excited about. It's AI is an obvious one. I think it's the capabilities and the things that we're able to do with AI that have eluded us for a long time. Things that large sets of data for us to compute and try to figure out, we couldn't make sense of it. What I'm alluding to is going back to my roots, especially in pharmaceuticals and biochemistries. I think machine learning, AI models, and believe it or not, also some quantum computing capabilities actually giving us insights into things that we haven't been able to do for centuries almost.
That is true. Every time, whenever, right now, I'm able to do a task or, let's say, produce a piece of writing without any use of generative AI, I feel proud. And I can't believe that there was a time before that we weren't able to do so. And I'm sure when it comes to corporations, right, makes it still a quite sensitive issue of how much rewriting we ask this generative AI tools to do for us.
I agree with you. I think people who are early in their career, what they know, what they're able to do compared to when I first entered the field is very different.
Yeah.
When I entered the field, Google wasn't around. Now you have generative AI capabilities that could find answers, that could reason with you, that could perform very deep analysis and research for you. You're no longer hunting for information. I think the information becomes available much quicker, and for people to consume it and utilize that information in innovative ways is the new skill set. So we're no longer looking for people that could necessarily go find things. I think the days of finding answers are easy now. Information is easy. So now there's more about what do you do with it.
Prompting, how to create the right prompt.
That too.
So whenever you're speaking to professionals that are looking to enter this field right now, what advice would you give them? What are the things you think they should be focusing more on? I'm sure it was very different when you just started, right? But whenever someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, Stan, I want to become a CISO one day. What should I do? Tell me 5 quick ways."
Well, the first thing, they should get a psychologist. They should sit down and have a very long talk if this is what they want to do. I think the one thing that hasn't changed, because it's probably one of the fastest areas from a technology movement standpoint. I think a lot of technologies move really fast. Cybersecurity is one that you have to keep across all the spectrums of technologies, whether it be infrastructure, data, software development, now with AI. I think that path is just faster and faster. And one thing you have to be passionate about is learning. If you're not interested in learning, it's going to be a really, really tough journey. And so you have to be a passionate learner, and you have to be willing to learn from almost anywhere and anyone. So long as you have that piece, I think it's going to keep you moving in your career. I think if you're new into the field, find a mentor, find a coach. Everyone's path is going to be a little different. I took the longest meandering path you could find, I think. but having a mentor is going to help accelerate that path for you, help open doors for you, create opportunities for you. And my last advice is you could take all the classes, you could do all the certifications. I think those are going to allow you to take on opportunities.
Yeah.
But what we look for a lot of the time is people who are passionate about the space.
Yeah.
They want to understand how things broke, which unfortunately is not something that you learn in school. That's something that's more experiential. One of the best ways of doing it, besides talking to people, building your network, talking to people in the field who's been doing this, understand their perspective, how they find out about things, how they learn about things. In other cases, if you're an independent learner, one of the advice I would say, go pick up a breach report. Because a lot of these information is now becoming more open, thankfully. So a lot of times you actually understand what went wrong versus, say, 15, 20 years ago, every single company keep that information to themselves.
Yeah.
And it's hard for other people to learn from it unless you experience it. And you don't want to be the person to experience it the first time.
Yeah.
So if you can learn from other people's mistake, understand what the attack looks like, how people defend about it, how they analyze for it, how they found it, gives you advantage. So if those who are interested, hey, is this something that I really want to do?
Yeah.
Go find that information, go read about it, and then go talk to someone who's experienced something similar. Right. Or if you so happen to be fortunate enough to find someone that survived a major security incident, those are great conversations to have.
What sort of incidents that you learned about that made you sort of be more excited about this space and think, hey, there's so much to learn, so much to do?
So unfortunately, I cannot talk about
not your personal, but can be
instance.
outside.
I'm fully fascinated by a lot of the software breaches that happens. Software vulnerabilities, what went wrong in the software stack. One of the ones I like to talk about is several years ago with, especially at the kernel level, how kernels goes wrong, because those are designed to be probably the most resilient part of any systems architecture.
Yeah.
But of course, we still make mistakes or vulnerabilities in it. And some of those vulnerabilities are so complex and they've been around for 5, 10, 15 years sometimes.
Yeah.
How people found it, I think, is always interesting. How potential exploited is interesting. And how they got there is also interesting, meaning what went wrong in the code.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very creative field. I think a lot of people underestimate how much creativity is involved in cybersecurity, whether it's finding those vulnerabilities or the ways to patch them. So, yeah, it's very interesting because I think it's one of the very few industries where it works because it constantly breaks. So,
well, you're not going to. There's no system that's 100% secure, right? You can't have absolute assurance because technology is implemented by someone, the code is written by someone, so it's very likely it's going to be a flaw in some place. So it's a very complex problem. I think the old adage of secure practitioners have to always be dead on. They have to be always correct.
Yeah.
And the hacker just have to be lucky one time. Yeah. So the odds are always against a practitioner.
Yeah.
Again, this is why I suggest if you really want to do what we do, therapy, having a good therapist is a good support system.
Yeah. Are you offering any of the therapy sessions? You're like, don't do it.
I've been doing it for a long time, so I probably need the most amount of therapy than most of my friends.
Yeah, I think, you definitely have to be built in a certain way to, be so excited to enter the field and be successful in this field.
You have to be comfortable with learning new things. You have to be comfortable with things not being perfect.
Yeah.
And you have to be comfortable with just expecting something to go wrong and just be able to be on top of it and understand what you can do next. It's exciting, but also could be frightening if you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. You have to be very much stress resilient, I would say. Yeah. We have this little tradition on our podcast done where typically our previous guest would ask a question to our next guest. So our previous guest had this question to you. What childhood experience was most impactful for you as an adult?
What childhood experience was most impactful?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a tough questions. I know we're going to stop with the grilling of the questions.
But I think because when I asked this question, I was like, you must be thinking about your own experience. And she said it was when her parents purchased a computer for her, and that in a way led her into the IT space, into security space. Mm-hmm. But I think it's very individual for everyone.
Here's what I would say. I've been, like I mentioned early in the podcast, I've been fortunate enough where people giving me a lot of opportunities. And that didn't start just after college. It started when I was also very young. We're immigrants from Asia. So coming to the U.S. was very challenging as a young kid.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to have teachers that were available to me, that were very, very patient with me. I've had friends that supported me. That finding your tribe, finding your circle of friends that you trust, finding people that you trust is very enduring, of course. But also doing what we do, absolutely, you need the same thing. Because most of the time, you hope everything's okay. When you run across that one challenging issue, whether it be an incident, whether it be a breach, or just something in the business side just didn't go the way you expected. And just having that network of people around you, having your tribe with you to support you is what makes us able to carry on forward in many cases.
Yeah. How to have trust when you have to navigate through zero trusts.
Exactly.
Out there. What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
Oh, and now I'm challenged with finding that next challenging question that's going to stump the next person. Okay, all right.
As a payback.
Most definitely. What is the hardest lesson that person has learned in their life?
Wow, that is a tough one. I can't imagine if someone would ask me this question, but it's a great question. They definitely gonna feel grilled. Hopefully not as much as you, but yeah. It was a pleasure to have you on our podcast, Tan. It's been a lot of fun. I'm sorry for all the grilling, but I think all the advice and all your thought direction that you shared would be super valuable to our listeners who are thinking to how to navigate through this space that has been evolving for many years and keeps on evolving for many years. And and whether they should really go to psychologists if they want to enter it in the first place. So it's been a lot of fun, and thank you so much for coming to our podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, and pleasure to be here.
Yeah.